Hello, Justin, and hello everyone else who's watching this. Just for the context, this is part of the second module of the Rails Architect MasterClass. The homework was to design the bounded context for your idea of an application or existing application. And Justin asked some questions around his productivity application that he, I believe, wants to work on or already works on. So here are some... I have another window open with the description of this. So basically, this is a productivity goal tracking application. And what Justin is suggesting, that maybe productivity is one bounded context. Maybe capture is another bounded context. Maybe planning is another bounded context, and maybe review. So I'm far from being a domain expert here in this area. However, there was a time in my life where I was trying to improve my productivity, and I was interested in the productivity tools and frameworks and so on. So I have some a little bit of knowledge. I would add some to add some other context here. I would say time management. Or just time is something. Very often a calendar is a bounded context, so sometimes it's like a calendar way of thinking about tasks. In the description, there's also the concept of goals. So maybe let's look at the idea of goals. Okay, so we have several. I like the view of RubyMine where I can see the modules like that. And in different bounded contexts, there should be a different language used. So I just I'm expressing this as a code immediately, although bounded context, they're not directly code, it's just a concept. But the idea is that I want to get the close feedback loops. I want to actually run it through the code and see whether it works or not for me. So, for example, if you work on such an application, there is actually so many features that you can build in, like look at Nozbe or look at Todoist or any other productivity tool. And some of those tools are focusing mostly on the idea of tasks and completing the tasks with the connection of calendar. So I'm not sure what would be the task actually there. Maybe capture. Okay, So maybe we have a task here, but maybe we have a task in many bounded contexts. This is actually something to be expected. Very often you would like to have a different name for that, but it's not always a rule. So if you find two bounded contexts, it's a good heuristic to think whether the same concept exists in both of them, but under a slightly different meaning. So meaning in a calendar, a task is more like a, I don't know, time slot maybe. Maybe we have some idea of estimate, time estimate, time used, maybe. So there are some objects. I'm not sure whether they are value objects or aggregates. I'm not thinking about so technical level right now. It's just here I can look at what exists in there already. As for goals, there is ideas like there might be a vision before we have a goal. Goal can be something simple, but can be like aggressive goal. So let's call it aggressive, something like big. What else can we do? Review is actually an interesting thing, but I'm not sure if this is a different bounded context, because it's usually reviewing what has happened before. And I think reviewing, it's usually in the context of calendar. So maybe reviewing is part of calendar, but I'm not sure. I'm just trying to brainstorm ideas. Checking if everything is done. So maybe reviewing is more like a read model, where you just want to see what has happened. And then when you spot some tasks, so read models can be cross-bounded context. So maybe review is more like, let's put it in the, just to make it wrapped. Another bounded context might be, I don't know, review, calendar view, or month view, for example, right? Month view, or tasks for day. I like to think that read models are always cross-bounded context, but it's not always the rule, actually. The idea is just I want to keep them separate because they usually bother me during, they are not helping me during my domain design, because read models are not really part of the domain. So they're just a way of displaying data, but domain is only the way of changing the data or making decision about the data. So what else do we have here? There is a concept of checklists, for example. So I'm not sure if this is another bounded context. Maybe it is. So a checklist is, for example, once you have a task in the plan, then it can be reflected as a checklist in some of the tools. But you might have it different in your application. Now, another heuristic is that does it make sense to have a bounded context, this bounded context, like being used in another application? Because it sounds like something that can be reusable, then it might be a good domain and a good bounded context, a good domain or subdomain. So checklists, definitely it's a feature for many applications, not only productivity applications. It can be also used for, I don't know, for tools like Trello or something like that. And by the way, if you have, if we are talking about productivity, usually there's some kind of team thinking involved. Sometimes you delegate, right? It's part of productivity to delegate stuff. So there is a concept of a team. Maybe you have a concept of, I don't know, assistant. Maybe a concept of team member. So you delegate the tasks, and maybe you have the task as well here, but only in the meaning that it's a delegated task, because in the team context you only think about, or maybe it's more like that you delegate it into someone else. So maybe another view that you would like to have is team tasks for today, right? And this way we can try to experiment, but the idea of coming up with a bounded context is just one part of it. But then you actually want to run this design through your actual requirements. So given this, all the stuff, maybe you now want to have some productivity test, and you actually want to write some unit tests for turning a goal to tasks, right? And then you want to, now you actually want to use the, for example, there is this goals, aggressive goal. Okay, so yeah, and now you can do something about it, right? So you can see whether the code makes sense. As programmers, we feel it sometimes very intuitively. That way you can do it. Obviously, I've only designed the objects here. There is not that much about methods. So now the behavior will appear, and you can use events as part of that immediately, but you can also think as events as being the extension of the object-oriented design. But obviously there are some events like task delegated. So for some people, thinking in terms of events first is much easier than thinking in terms of objects. That's why the idea of event storming came up. So maybe you have task delegated, maybe you have assistant hired, maybe you have assistant got sick and now you have a problem because you no longer can delegate for this time, or some tasks which are delegated, you need to rehandle this. So thinking in terms of events is much easier sometimes, because, and also while the concept of bounded context is really important, it's not always easy to get the right split at the beginning, and it's important to try, but you will not get it perfectly done at the beginning. Sometimes there is a technique, and I'm using it for those domains where I'm really far from being an expert, where I just have module, whatever, my app, and then I don't have modules for bounded context because I just putting everything in this one kind of global context under my app. And only after I write some code, I write some events, I have some basic functionalities done, only then I see the split of the context. I see the different languages being used. I see the same concepts in different bounded contexts. So then I'm actually building the missing parts to actually make the split. And that's like another technique. From going back to your questions, those bounded contexts, they do sound like good candidates at the beginning. So now you would have to go through your requirements, your actual issues to work on, and see how good it really works in practice, and which of them you need at the beginning, and which of them maybe you totally don't need. I hope it's helpful. That would be my approach to the initial domain analysis. But obviously there are many other ways, including like event storming and using post-it notes to visualize those events, or just writing down the code. So event storming in terms of being more like async and remote would be in terms of code. So we would just write more and more events as class definitions. When you think in terms of events, it also helps because events are kind of chronological. So you can always explore the domain in your head or with your team by thinking, okay, what happened before that? So task was delegated. It means that the task was first actually created. When it was created? Maybe it was created because one of your goals required this task. Why? When was the goal created? Why was the goal created? Like, were you inspired by someone? So even the aggressive goals, the goals part is that you can have actually per each goal, you can have inspiration. So a person who already achieved this goal, and maybe it was a character in a movie, maybe it's your friend, and they inspired you, and it's good to actually attach the inspiration to the goal, so that you always remind yourself who was the inspiration for that. Okay, enough. Thank you. I hope it was useful.